Hello, everybody. Welcome to APL Readers Corner. My name is Tessie, and I'm here with Nicole today. We are doing our weekly Readers Corner, so if this is the first time that you've joined us for Readers Corner, every week we pick a book from a different genre, and we kind of read and discuss the book. We post all of the book choices online on our calendar, so if you want to read ahead and then comment in while you're watching the video and let us know if you like the book or if you hate the book. But it's basically a reader discussion review, and all the books are available right away on Hoopla. So if you watch our video and you haven't read the book and you feel like you want to after listening to us talk about it, you can go straight on Hoopla with your library card and check out the book. So this week we are reading the book, we read the book, Reclaiming Home by Lesego Malepe, who is a South African author. So I had a lot of fun reading that book. And we looked at the genre of travel nonfiction. So that's the book that the genre we picked from today or this week.
Someday. Yeah, so it was really cool learning a little bit more about travel nonfiction, or what they call travel writing. And so the definition of it is a form of creative nonfiction in which the narrator's encounters with foreign places serve as the dominant subject, also called travel literature, which makes a lot of sense because this was kind of like a diary form where Lesego documented her account as she went back to South Africa, which is her native home. Some of the common themes and characteristics I found was actually from this website called Pitch Travel Write. It was kind of some suggestions on how to make a good travel writing novel, and some of those were: you need an active approach to travel. It needs to be engaging and requires full participation compared to tourists who just participate in group tours and look for packages where everything is planned out for them. So the travel writers tend to find what typical tourists don't. So they'll go to different areas, foods, culture that the tourists kind of stray away from. They need to make sure they have well-developed social skills, which is big because you need the ability to approach strangers on your travel and ask them questions. Which I definitely think that happened a lot in this book. So if you want to travel write, you need to be very social and talk to people you normally wouldn't in your adventures. You need to use all your senses and descriptions and stories to make it multidimensional. And that travel writers should share their opinions about the places they visit, / they also enjoy doing the research before they even go to travel. So you need to be aware that you need to be open and honest about the places you visit. Don't just say, oh, it was great, be honest, nitty gritty. And then also they make sure to do well-researched research before they actually go to their destinations.
I don't think I've asked you this yet, Nicole, but do you read a lot of travel nonfiction? Have you read a good amount?
I do not. No, this was probably my first one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like reading travel nonfiction, so I was really excited about reading this book. And I think that it ranks pretty high up on a good travel nonfiction book, just in general. So that's my 2 cents. But the book in particular, so again, it's called Reclaiming Home by Lesego Malepe. And it's in a diary format, which I did not know when we picked the book out. So I was pleasantly surprised. Like at first I started reading it and I was like, this is a diary? And usually I don't like diary formats because it leaves a lot out, but I feel that it worked for this particular nonfiction book. So it's the diary of the author while she's traveling in South Africa in 2004 during the 10th anniversary of South Africa's democracy. So because she's from South Africa and it's the 10th anniversary of democracy in South Africa, there's like a lot of modern history put into that book and a lot of what she went through personally during apartheid and during democracy. You get a little bit of when South Africa was turning into democracy, which is kind of very interesting. So the book begins with Malepe taking the bus from Pretoria, where she grew up, to Cape Town, where she visits Robben Island, the prison where her brother served a life sentence during the apartheid days. She interrupts her travels to return to Pretoria, where she attends a ceremony marking the official settlement of land claims for her parents' property and her grandmother's property, which were confiscated during the apartheid government when Malepe was 4. Which forced her family, along with the rest of her community, to move to the Mamelodi township for Africans. So basically, the entire book is kind of her visiting all these places in South Africa that she didn't necessarily see when she was growing up, and then kind of incorporating her current life. So she's visiting the prison, so she can kind of like get a sense of what her brother went through, even though she did visit it when she was a child to visit her brother. And then you're kind of hearing her story about where she's trying to get compensation or getting her land back, her family's land back, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't known that about apartheid. And so she's basically traveling around South Africa and she's visiting friends. So she talks to a lot of people and she sees a lot of places that she hadn't seen before. And basically the whole point of the book is her revealing the way that South Africa has changed from her childhood to modern day. And so in that way, she's kind of reclaiming her home. A little bit more about the author. She left apartheid South Africa with a Fulbright scholarship. So she got a scholarship in 1978. And then she completed her graduate work in political science at Boston University, and where she teaches now in political science. And one really interesting thing that I thought was really cool about her was that she has judged for many years as the Children's Africana Book Awards. She's a judge for those awards, and is part of the Outreach Council of the African Studies Association, which leads workshops for teachers about how to teach Africa in general and how to use African literature in the classroom, which I think is really important because, or at least from a US perspective, like you don't really learn that much about Africa. So I think her living in the US and her putting her time towards helping people understand what Africa is and who the people who live there are like and how to teach their literature, I think is really important. So I thought that was really cool. And another interesting fact is that she does a lot of her work in the Boston University's library. So I was like, we're in a library. She loves libraries. It's great. So that's just a little bit about the author. I will say one thing in particular about this book is that it is published by a really small press. And I think the only reason that we picked it out to read is because it just showed up on Hoopla Digital randomly. So it's not one of those books that is like an award winner like you see everywhere you go. It's like one of those like hidden jewel sort of books. So I really enjoyed reading it. And I was glad that we were fortunate enough to like find it. So
it's true, especially because according to reviews of this book, there is actually no rating on Hoopla for this book. So for those of you who do end up reading this book, if you really enjoy it, I think you should put a rating on Hoopla so that maybe more people can actually see this book come up in their search results more often. Amazon has a 5 out of 5. That is it's a pretty stellar review there. Goodreads has a 4 out of 5. I would definitely also put it up there as probably a 4 out of 5. I'm sorry. 5 is pretty big in my opinion. It needs to be super stellar for me. But let's get to the real discussion here is, well, Essie, we knew you liked the book, but what did you like best about this book?
I think that what I like the best about this book, because a lot of travel nonfiction, when you read it, it's from someone not from that place going to that place. So you have someone from usually a Western country going to somewhere else in the world that it's like usually it's like somewhere in Asia, somewhere in like South America, where they're like experiencing this whole new way of living. They experience different cultures. sometimes with travel nonfiction, even though I read a lot of it, I don't like the way it's a little bit demeaning towards the country that they're going to visit. Like, I totally understand that when you're writing travel nonfiction, that you want to just present the honesty of it, but a lot of the time it's the honesty from a certain point of view. So it's someone who's coming from a Western civilization where you have all the amenities that you could possibly need, and then you go to this place that maybe it's really hard to find like food that you like, or it's a lot of hardships, and so it's instinctively going to be a little bit more negative. What I really liked about this book is that she is from South Africa. She's lived in South Africa. She grew up there, and she just left for a while. She went to the U.S. to go to school, and now she teaches there, and she's a citizen of the U.S. now. And then she just goes back. So it's kind of reliving that childhood, her childhood, and kind of seeing how South Africa has changed, but it's not as negative as I feel an outside perspective would have been. So that was my favorite part.
It's true. I mean, she had actually mentioned how, because she's lived in both places, sometimes when she was in America, she would think about how would I, how do I view this place compared to South Africa? And then when she was in South Africa again, I need to stop viewing this place as if it were America again. And then she actually had that conversation with that woman who, wanted to see Johannesburg and Cape Town, mentioned something where, well, I hope it's like LA. And, Lesego's like, well, why are you here if you want it to be just like America?
Yeah.
That kind of defeats the purpose of traveling to a place you haven't experienced yet. So yeah, that's definitely true. I didn't think about that a lot of travel nonfiction shows a lot of people going to a culture that is different from their own, and they put their opinions and views into it, which may sometimes be a little negative because they are constantly going back to their westernized culture, like you had said. So that was a good point. Was there anything you didn't like about this book?
Yes, which is kind of the same vein as in that, because I read a lot of travel nonfiction, I'm used to there being a lot more going on. And for this book, there wasn't. So there wasn't like a lot of, like, she had a specific goal in this, which is that she wanted to re-experience South Africa. But she didn't go in there looking for like the most exciting parts of South Africa, and it shows because there's not like a lot of like exciting parts of it. Like, it's pretty it's pretty like down to earth kind of exploration, and like she's the one that brings it to life with her stories, but she's not necessarily going to places and being like, oh, look at this cool thing or look at that cool thing, which sometimes I appreciate because I've never been to South Africa, so I would like to know about the cool things in South Africa, but she doesn't go specifically to seek it out.
It's true. I'm a foodie, so I would have loved to hear her talk about more of the different dishes that they have. Because, I mean, she mentioned here and there, she obviously, this entire trip she is there, she is staying with different friends and family members. And each time she visits a new family member or friend or colleague or someone, they always have an extravagant meal, a feast for her, because they're so excited for her to be there. And she mentions briefly some of the different things she's eaten, but like I said, as a foodie, not being able to experience their food yet, maybe someday, I would have loved to learn more about that and their cooking, and maybe even her memories of maybe when her mom cooked, because her mom was big into her garden. And her prized garden, her prized flowers, and so I would have loved to see some maybe memories, a little more memories of her growing up as well, and of course food. Big foodie. I like the food. So based on some of the characteristics I had kind of talked about for the travel writing, do you think this book ties in with a lot of those themes or characteristics?
Yeah, I think so. She travels around, she talks to a lot of people. As an introvert, I'm like, wow. Like, you just walk up to someone and start a conversation. That's so amazing. But yeah, I think fits into the genre. So it's definitely a travel nonfiction book.
I don't think it was hard though for her to talk to people she didn't know, because it seemed that culture, they were very open to talking to one another. And this boggled my mind, was every time she asked a person a direction to somewhere, they're just like, let me walk with you. We'll go that way. And she's like, aren't you going the opposite way? And she's like, yeah, let's go. And I was like, wow. If you think about it in America, no offense, but if you're like, hey, which way is this way? They'll be like, take a left, take a right, take a left, or Google Maps it. That's pretty much how we do it. So for them to just constantly be like, oh, let me walk you, let me take you. I don't think it was that hard for her to be able to talk to other people. I thought the same thing when she struck up that conversation with that woman who all of a sudden is talking about her dirty, cheating ex-husband.
Yeah, that was
and
fun.
It was like, whoa, that is a lot of information to a stranger. But it just seems that kind of culture, that they're very open with each other and they're willing to talk to each other as long as the other person is willing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some discussion questions we can talk about. In what ways do you think Malepe reclaimed her home?
So I think it was really interesting that by the end of the book, so she goes on this journey, and during it, she discovers the chance to, she applies for a grant so she can write about her childhood home, and I think the land reclamation sort of process, and she gets the grant. So it's like after she goes through this entire trip where she's revisiting friends and family, she gets this chance to stay, and then she stays. I think it's like an extra year
I believe
after
so.
her trip. So I think she's there just about 2 years, which I think is really interesting, that she re-experiences her home and makes it a part of herself again, and then she decides to stay a little bit longer.
I think that's true. I also think it has a lot to do with her language, because she was very adamant about when she was in South Africa, she would do as best as she could to speak the language, which is Setswana. I think that's her language, but there's multiple different languages in South Africa, and she picks up a little bit on it, and she's willing to speak to natives, in their own language. And she didn't like it when she saw that there were some family members that only speak English. There were some children that they only speak English, and it's like, what's wrong with your Afrikaans language now? I think it has a lot to do with that. She was kind of, like you said, revisiting her home, but also revisiting her culture and her language, and just, coming to terms saying that, this is who I am, and this is my home, and I'm coming back, and in the settlement and everything, I'm reclaiming this is my home. Let's see, so travel writing gives you a snapshot of a different place you may have never been before. What did you learn about South Africa from this book that you didn't already know, and what surprised you?
I feel like I didn't know as much as I should have about apartheid when I was reading this book. Like, I've read some books about it, but I feel like whenever you're studying history in school, you always get right up to World War II, and then everything else stops after that. So I don't know as much about that time period in South Africa other than just reading a couple books myself. So I feel like I learned a lot, especially from her personal perspective and how it influenced her, which I thought was really interesting. And I didn't know about the apartheid government taking land from people forcefully. And I didn't know that now they're in the process of the current South African government is now in the process of giving people either compensation or that land back, which I thought was really interesting, that a government would actually take those steps to do that. So those are what kind of I learned about from this book.
Right. Yeah. No. I actually took a class in college in democracy and justice studies, and one of the biggest places we talked about was the apartheid. So there were um, certain places and certain movements that I definitely remember. I definitely remember Robben Island. I definitely remember them talking about that. I remember them talking about the different languages like Zulu and Xhosa and Setswana, and obviously the places, besides just what everyone knows as Johannesburg and Cape Town. I remember Pretoria. I remember a lot of the other places that she was discussing. So it was really cool to see it from, like you said, someone's perspective who actually lived there.
Mhm.
And not to mention, not just that, but then her going back and seeing the outcome of the 10th anniversary of, you know, the apartheid being abolished, and how there's still some lingering resentment that still goes on, obviously. And then, not to mention the reclaiming of the land, the settlements. I didn't even think about. I didn't even think about that, or how hard it was for a lot of them, and just now be getting their money. And some of them, like Malepe's parents, they don't even get to reap the benefits of reclaiming their land back. Now it's the kids, and so I know she had mentioned a couple times she really wished her mom would have seen it. So, yeah. Were there any places in this book that you would have liked to visit the most?
I think reading this book, it gave me a new appreciation for South Africa. A lot of the places I did not know, so it's like I wouldn't be able to point to one and be like, I want to go there. But I feel like I would want to visit South Africa. I loved her descriptions when she would be on the bus and she'd be driving from one city or one township to the other, and it was just like she'd go through some places where like it was just wide open space, and like that kind of description just like caught my interest, so I would like to see that myself one day. I feel like
Yeah. I want to taste the food.
mm-hmm.
I really want to taste the food. When you mentioned some of the things, or they roasted the meat on the spit, I was like, oh, I bet that's really good.
Yeah.
Yummy. So let's see here. Written material always comes from a certain perspective. So how do you think Malepe's viewpoint changes the way South Africa looks, and how do you think it would look from another person's perspective?
I think if this book, I think I mentioned at the very beginning just about travel writing in general, and one reason I like this book is because it was from her perspective, and it was someone, and because she is from South Africa. I feel like if this book had been from, like, say, someone from the US who's never been to South Africa and they just went to experience it, like, we'd get like different things highlighted. I feel like they definitely would have researched about apartheid and like talk about it a little bit, but we wouldn't get that in-depth experience of how it relates to actual people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with her as the author, you got to see like what parts of that history impacted her the most, which was really nice. I thought that was a really great perspective.
No, I think that's true. And yeah, you said, you know, most of the people that come, that travel, right, they visit a place they don't intimately know, where Malepe intimately knew this area. I think she still had, you know, she still had the American viewpoint in the back of her mind as well, because she's also lived in America for so long. Did this book give you any feels?
Any feels?
Any feels?
Yeah, I feel like when she was like visiting with her family, um, it was just such a nice warm feeling that she could just go someplace and she was so welcomed, which I thought was really interesting. I really like those parts.
Yeah, no, I like the parts too. I like those parts too, or even like we're friends of friends
Mm-hmm.
that were so welcome and open, and like, you know, giving them her gifts and everything. Like, never met these people before, that they, you know, gave her little gifts. Some of them asked them to come visit her at work so they could keep her company and learn all about her and stuff. And so, yeah, definitely it was like, wow, this all the people she, spent time with were like family to her, and that's really sweet. I love that. Do you think you would read another book by this author?
I think so. I might put it like on my book list because she did write another book that's a fiction book.
Okay.
I forgot what the title is, but she wrote that book before she did Reclaiming Home, and by now she might have written other books as well. But I might put her other book on my book list just so I could get, because I like reading books from perspectives, like different perspectives across the world from like international authors, and she counts as an international author even though she lives in the US and she's a US citizen. So I would put it on that book list just so I could get her perspective of different things. So
Yeah. I think I would love to read more about her time when she was younger in South Africa during the apartheid.
yeah.
And then kind of like comparing it to Reclaiming Home. I think that would be really cool. I think we might have already touched on it, but were there any gaps do you think that the author should have filled in, or points where they shared too much or not enough?
I feel like if you don't read this book, if you start reading this book and you don't know anything about South Africa, you're going to be very lost. And I wish that she probably just didn't want to take the time to just explain the whole South African modern history, which I respect, because that would have taken like 100 pages. The book would have been very long. But I feel like if you try reading the book and you don't know anything about South Africa, you're going to have a lot of gaps and you're going to be like, I don't know what's going on. So there's that, some of the modern history in there.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially also maybe some of the political figures that she had mentioned that were part of the apartheid movement. If you hadn't known a lot about the apartheid, a lot of those people probably be like, well, who cares? But a lot of those people made a big impact. So you'd almost have to go back and forth and research those people in order for you to really understand what was happening during that time. If you got the chance to ask the author one question, what would it be?
I don't know. I put that question down for us to talk about, and then I forgot to think of what a question might be.
Hoping I wouldn't ask you that.
Do you have a question or an answer to that question?
Would she have continued to stay in South Africa if she did not get the grant?
That's a good question. Now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like instead of asking her a question, like I feel like she's just so knowledgeable, and I would just want to sit and let her just talk about whatever she wants to talk about is what I would want.
That's true.
I feel like if I just sat down and just let her talk about whatever she wanted to talk about, I would like gain so much.
Good point. Okay, last question. What do you think the author's purpose was in writing this book? What ideas do you think she was trying to get across?
I think that a part of it was convenience because she was going to South Africa anyways. It was a good book topic, but I think a part of it that made it so it pushed her to actually take the time to like write it and turn it into a book, which is definitely really hard. Like it's not as easy as just being like, oh, here's my diary, let's turn it into a book. Is that she wanted people who read this book to understand a little bit more about South Africa, because even though the US is her home, South Africa is also her home. And helping people understand a little bit more about it just through her eyes, I feel like was important for her.
Yeah, I feel like it was, I think at the time, I think obviously because it was in such diary form, I think it was just her getting her thoughts and feelings down, revisiting her home, but then it turned into something more, and it was kind of like, like you said, she wanted to let people understand what it's like now in South Africa, because I'm sure people have a certain view of South Africa, or they may not even have any knowledge of South Africa. So this would be a good book to kind of start getting people to notice South Africa, or to get people interested in South Africa a little more.
Yeah.
Well, that's all my questions I have for you.
Wow, looks like we are done then. If you guys have read the book, or if you are now interested in the book, leave us a comment down below and let us know. We appreciate comments, and it lets us know if you guys like the books that we're reading. But next week we're going to have another mystery read. So next week on Friday, so it's going to be July 10th, and we are going to be reviewing a Western, Desperados by Ron Hansen. So that's going to be very action-packed. I'm excited.
My first Western, so I'm very excited.
I just recently read a bunch of Westerns, or not a bunch, but a couple. So I'm kind of excited to kind of compare.
Yeah.
And then we also do mystery reads every Thursday through July for at 1 p.m. And it's going to be on Facebook as well, as long with this one. And for that one, we read the first chapter of the first 15 minutes of book, and then you just try and guess what kind of book it is. Then we do a brief book talk. It's basically a program that lets you experience a book without any prior knowledge. Yeah. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.